Thanks, Chris, for that introduction. Like Chris said, I've been working in the Kalahari for quite some time now. My journey actually started back in 1998 when I was working for the government of Botswana, the Department of Wildlife and National Parks, who then transferred me to Kalahari to start my work there. It was my first time in the area, and I had never actually been into that area, and I enjoyed my time there, and I don't regret any moment that I've been in that particular side of the country. My talk today basically to be more like a story about what I have learned, what I have read about, and what I understand to be the challenges and possibly the solutions for what I believe to be a mistake that was done in the past, particularly with the establishment of our protected areas. This picture was taken in 1999 when I was still learning my field work as a biologist. This was my first wildebeest that I collared in that area. And that opened my eyes about what survival in this kind of environment is. And the story of my life started on this particular event. I don't want to assume that everybody knows where Botswana is. This map I particularly put it here so that people can appreciate where Botswana is. It actually sits in the southern Africa, just above South Africa, because I know some people, especially in the States, sometimes confuse Botswana, South Africa to Southern Africa, believing that Botswana is part of South Africa. This is the area where the talk is going to be all about. I also want to make sure we are on the same page, because I've had incidents where people sort of misunderstand the protected area patterns in Botswana. The map that I've just put in here is a map of Botswana showing our protected areas, which are green areas. This is where we do not allow any hunting into these areas. They could either be national parks or game reserves. There's strict in terms of what we can do inside the episodes, primarily for tourism and conservation. And then the lighter part of the areas, the way my pointer is, those are what you call wildlife management areas. These are semi-protected. They serve primarily for conservation, but there are communities in or around those areas, and there's a sustainable management of natural resources in those areas such that communities can be allowed to utilize the resources with those areas within a sustainable manner. They most of the time act as buffer zones between this brownish area, which are communal grazing lands, where people can keep livestock, practice agriculture. This is where most of residential places are. Because of the human impact, these wildlife management areas actually act more like a cushion to limit the impact of anthropogenic effects into our protected areas. My talk will focus on this area which I've highlighted with the red cycle, which is the southwest of Botswana, particularly between the Central Kalahari Game Reserve and the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. Just so that I also make sure you appreciate it. This area, as you can see, is not formally protected like national parks and game reserves. My talk will primarily be to highlight the importance of this area, as well as what I believe to be a threat to this area and how it may eventually affect what we consider to be our protected areas. When you look at the Google map of this area using Google Earth, one thing that you will appreciate when you're looking at it from the northeast to the southwest, you will realize that it's becoming dark greener to light brown. What that basically depicts is the the greenness or vegetation cover as you move from the northwest to the southwest. And that is an indication of rainfall patterns. Rainfall becomes very low as you move from the northeast to the southwest. And by virtue of that, animals in those areas survive primarily by moving from one area to the other to go for greener pastures and also to access water. I know most people know about the Okavango Delta and the northern Botswana, where we have a lot of animals like elephants, rhinos, and so forth. But the southwest of Botswana also holds a very significant populations of wildlife that have a very significant role in terms of our tourism product, as well as preserving this sensitive ecosystem. When you zoom into this area, what you see will be those white patches. These are salt pans that are common in this part of the area, and actually it's something that makes this area unique. When you look at those patches that are brighter in terms of being more white than others, most of them are, you will find villages and settlements. Naturally, wildlife will be using those areas, one, at night to avoid predation, but also for salt licks. The vegetation around these pens are also very nutritious, and that's also a form of attraction for wildlife. But obviously, as you remember, if you may know that most of the people in the southwest of Botswana have this hunter-gatherer history. That's why they settled around these areas. I want to believe it was more to get advantage of hunting animals around those pens. And when you zoom even closer, this is the kind of how these salt pens look like. And some of them can be as long as half a kilometer or more. And some of them will be bare, like there'll be no vegetation in the middle of those. And in some areas, you may find that some of them are vegetated. But the interesting thing is that in all these pens, salt licks, very high quality grasses, and also acting like a refuge where they can go at night to avoid predation from lions, leopards, and all those animals that usually hunt at night. And in an undisturbed system, this is this kind of sighting you will have when you come to these pens. This is one of the pens in in that same area. You see lots of wildlife. These are some of the red hartebeest in the area, but there will be other animals like gemsbok, blue wildebeest, springbok, and so forth. You will see some of them as I continue with my talk. I want to, when people talk about drylands ecosystems, most of the first animals that come to their minds is the gemsbok. This table or this graph that I'm presenting here is extracted from one of my colleagues, Jeremy Perkins, who was trying to demonstrate how well our protected areas are protecting our wildlife. If you look at this graph, you can be very happy that our protected areas, which are PAs in this system, are actually protecting most of our gemsbok. And wildlife management areas, which are abbreviated as WMAs, we have some significant populations of gemsbok. But when we switch gears and go to the other species, the scenario changes. If you look at the one on the top left, the red hartebeest, we have almost half of the population in our wildlife management areas. When you look at the wildebeest on the top right, we have more wildebeest outside of our protected areas. The same with eland, especially with the recent years. Particularly if you look at 2015, most of our elands were outside our protected areas. We also have springbok. Again, most of our springbok population is sitting outside our protected areas. So what this basically tells us is that much as these are supposed to be protected areas protecting our wildlife, key resources are actually outside of these resources, of these reserves. This is one mistake that I want to talk about, that when our protected areas were designed or demarcated, some of these key areas were not taken into consideration. Because if we actually looked at where the animals prefer to be most of the time, I want to believe this part of the wildlife management areas should have been protected. Because at the current state, anything can go in there, can happen there. We can have human population increasing, livestock and then that will compromise access to resources of this important wildlife species. When you look at wildebeests particularly, this is the latest aerial survey data that we have access to. As you can see from within the red circle, this is our wildlife management area. If you look at the Kalahari Transfrontier Park, which is to the south of that, this is the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. As you can see, we have some dots of presence along the Nosop Valley, but majority of our wildebeest are actually in these wildlife management areas. We have some wildebeest in, these are private game ranges, which we know very well that these do not contribute to our life, to our wild population. And then in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, we still have very few of them, but not as many as we have in the wildlife management areas. I think it's important that I also take you back in history to show you how these animals used to survive in this dry land. In a normal rainfall pattern, the wildebeest primarily and other ungulates will be staying in this area, which a gentleman called Pasaju came to this area in 1901. Liked the area and actually named it the Shwele. I can't remember exactly what it means, but this is an important wildlife habitat which was discovered in 1901, and our protected areas were actually established in the 1960s, late 1960s. And this important area was not part of the protected areas. When drought years come, these animals will go to the northeast around the Okavango Delta area to access the Buteti River and the Okavango systems to survive the droughts, or they will go onto the Molopo and the Nosop Valley when they were still flowing around those times. But due to land use changes that also included construction of cordon fences, some of the movement, particularly to the east, was blocked. And the movement of the wildebeest to that area was actually compromised. And the government of Botswana was concerned about the mortalities that happened around these fences. And a series of studies were done. The one that started in 1989 to 1992 showed that indeed there is some connection between the KTP system and the Central Kalahari Game Reserve system. A similar study was repeated from 1998, which also showed that there is still some movement, but very limited. This was much of a concern because it was expected that the provision of waterholes in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve will facilitate movement between the two areas and act as more as a drought season movement refuge. I was involved in a study again when I was with Conservation International, where we wanted to establish whether indeed there could be some movement between the Central Kalahari Game Reserve and the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. The data that you see there is 16 months data. And as you can see, most of the wildebeest were making localized movements within the wildlife management areas, within the area that is not protected. This again shows how important these areas are to these ungulates. West University also had a student working collaring wildebeest and Gemsbok around the KTP site. As you can also see on this map, this movement data for wildebeest, which is light brown, which is green, and the Gemsbok, which is light brown. This light line is actually the park boundary of the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. You can see that most of the movements were outside the park within the area that I've just highlighted. I want to make you aware that this green spot here, there's a village called Zutswa, which has about 500 people in the village. Another village up here called Ngwatle, which has got about 300 to 400 people. Looking at the movement of these animals and the location of the settlements, and we all know the human population is increasing and will continue to increase. The impact of the human population increase to these animals is not very far from where we are. When we look at the distribution of livestock in the area, I'll talk more about that at a later stage, but basically livestock is moving slowly into these areas, following where the people are, as well as going for other areas that are still possible for grazing. During the Conservation International study, there was a commission to try and establish, looking at all important variables, whether it is actually possible that wildlife can move from the southwest to the northwest. I mean, from the southwest to the northeast. This map, as you can see, the blue spots are areas where it's very, very unlikely, actually almost impossible for wildlife to go in. These are settlement areas where human population is very high, a lot of livestock, a lot of activities, fences, all those barriers that can compromise or prevent any movement. And the red are where there will be marginal access to these areas. And as you can see, there are just some stepping stones where wildlife may potentially move from the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. They will have to find their way, maneuver around these red spots into the CKGR, or move from the other side into the CKGR. While this was not bad, promising, around the same time, the government of Botswana reviewed land use patterns, or our land use map. And what saddened most of the conservationists across the country and internationally was the dezoning of this very important piece, which was part of the wildlife management area. I think the next slide will demonstrate it better so that you can appreciate what this means. When I superimpose that on this map, this is what it does. It basically reduces, almost eliminates the only possible access between the CKGR and the KTP. And what this means practically, because this area is going to be used as livestock ranches and so forth, which means there are going to be potentially fences around that area, and so preventing any possible movement between the two parks. Now, moving from the wildebeest to the eland, a colleague of mine, Derek Kipping, did some spore surveys in this area to try and understand the trends in the distribution and movement. And these are some of the pictures that were taken around that area. You'll be amazed how you can almost drive from the Nosop Valley into the Mabuya-Sube system on the 4x4 trails and not see a single eland. You will not struggle the same way when you are in these wildlife management areas. You have to look again at the trends of the eland, which is on the bottom left of your screen, which demonstrates how wildlife management areas are contributing to eland population management. Now, looking at the latest aerial surveys distribution maps, again, our area, which is in the southwest, just above the KTP, demonstrates its importance for our wildlife. What Derek Kipping did, which I also like most, he tried to compare the Serengeti system with the with these wildlife areas, particularly looking at the eland. As you can see, this part of the system has the largest population of free-ranging eland. It's a dry land system with very limited water. Most of the water is actually along the Nosop Valley, which is very far from where these animals are moving most of the time. So they actually, in an area which is very dry, they only get water once in a while in a very wet season when these salt pens have got some water, which most of the time do not even last for more than 2 weeks. But it holds a very significant population of eland. And I have to remind you again, this is not a protected area. When you look at the springbok population, this is one of the worrying scenarios in Botswana. The springbok population is declining across the country, including in this area. But the most important thing is that even though the population is declining, we still have a significant population of springbok in these wildlife management areas. When you look at the KTP, you look at the CKGR, this picture demonstrates you don't need to look further. You can understand that really something needs to be done to maintain this area, to continue providing these important resources that animals tend to like. I need to also remind you that the settlement that I talked about, that I said Zutsha, is very close to where we see this dark spot. For your information, this community is one of those communities that I believe to be doing a lot of illegal hunting. One can understand because of their history, but at the same time, these animals are also close to them. It's all about, do they have any value on them to try and protect them? Do they have alternatives? If these animals prefer to stay closer to the villages, even though they are believed to be illegally hunted, surely there is something in this area that make the animals to stay, and it deserves to be protected in one way or the other. With the Kalahari Research and Conservation, we collared some of the springbok in the area. This picture, I just want to demonstrate one of the movements of this collared springbok that we had. Again, look at where the settlement Zutsha is and the other settlement that I talked about. This head of springbok, which sometimes will be about 500 animals in one head, will be moving very close to these settlements, accessing whatever it is there that they like. How long this is going to be, it's still unknown, particularly if you consider the effect of human population associated agricultural activities like livestock and illegal hunting, as I just mentioned. So we don't know if this will continue to be the case. I believe the population, the fact that it continues to be declining for other natural factors like illegal offtake, competition with livestock, will make this decline even worse than we actually see now. This is another springbok that was collared just on the edge of the KTP. It spent most of the time around the waterhole on the edge of the KTP, but towards the middle of the dry season, it went straight to the north of Valley, where it's spending most of the time there. I want to believe in the wet season they will be going back into this important area that I'm talking about. When you drive between the settlements, this is the kind of game viewing you will experience. You will have to slow down and easily allow them to move on the side so that you can drive through. Unfortunately for the springbok, I think they have a very bad experience with vehicles. They will run away as quickly as they can. But this is the paradise that I'm talking about, which is threatened because there is no protection. The human population is slowly encroaching, and other factors that may come naturally. Still, what you will see as you drive around these settlements, this is the road from Zutsha to Ngwatle, the same with the picture that you just saw. And beside the wildlife, this area is very beautiful. When you look at this picture, there's a lot you can say about it. The beauty of the pen, how the rainbow blends with the landscape. When you wake up in the morning and you see something like this, surely you want to come back to experience this kind of scenario. But it's even more beautiful if there will be wildlife in the pen. That would be a very beautiful combination that one would want to experience. We have a good proportion of the Basara community, which most people prefer or know them as Bushmen. We have got a very rich culture, which can contribute to tourism. Most of the time, we tend to blame these people for hunting, much as we understand from the conservation aspect, but at the same time, it's their culture, it's their way of life. We need to find a way of making them part of the conservation agenda. What I mean by this is that it needs to be made to understand the value of preserving or conserving this wildlife for future generations, and also benefiting from them through tourism and other, ecotourism related activities, and also using their culture as part of the tourism attraction. When you sit around the fire with these guys, you learn a lot about their survival skills. What you see there is how they make fire and how they keep fire in this small, can they put some coal there, and it will be active for quite some time. Whenever they need to make fire, they don't need to struggle to get the fire going. You learn quite a lot. The more you spend time with these guys, the more you will love the Kalahari. You will want to make these guys part of the tourism value in terms of their culture, not them as individuals, but the culture that they have, which if we are going to lose this wildlife, we are going to lose this culture, we are going to lose something that can also diversify our cultural product, our tourism product. They will show you how they make their fire from the natural products using sticks and grasses without matches or a lighter, which most of us use in the modern world. They are very proud of their culture. The smiles on their faces tells a very rich story. We once went to Zutra when I was with Conservation International, and one of our guests was impressed by this traditional troop, which by then did not even have uniform. They were just using their own clothes. And after being impressed by how they were dancing, how they were passionate about their culture, then they bought them this attire, just to encourage this rich culture that they have. And this was actually motivated the establishment of Western Kalahari Cultural Festival, which was launched around 2010, particularly to try and acknowledge this rich culture that these people have. They use products from the fields, like the eggshells, to make crafts, which are very beautiful, and they can actually even more attractive to the international market, which needs to be tapped in, encouraged. These old women will just spend their time, enjoy doing what they like and what they know best. They just need to be encouraged by them being part of the tourism and conservation of these important areas. Again, like I said, when you're camping in these areas and you see this in the morning, your experience is something that you will want to keep for the rest of your life. Now, looking at the human impact on this area, like I mentioned, livestock is slowly encroaching. If you look at this graph, cattle, sheep, and goats, compared to wildlife, there's been a significant increase over time. And this is going to continue. And the more it continues, the more it will impact on these wildlife areas, the more it will affect our protected areas. Because ecologically, you expect protected areas to act as source populations. But in this kind of scenario, this wildlife management is actually the ones providing our protected areas with wildlife. So if we lose this source population to livestock, because the communities, they have to have a way of living. So if they do not benefit from tourism or from conservation efforts, they will naturally settle for agriculture, which will probably mean cattle and livestock, and goats. I'm just putting this map to demonstrate the impacts of the anthropogenic impact. Those small patches, polygons that you see there, they are either plowing fields or crawls from livestock. And that red line is actually a 10-kilometer radius from the center of the village. So if we get the same scenario in those settlements that I talked about, the impact on the wildlife management areas is going to be huge, and the loss, I don't think it will be reversible. I want to show you this picture just to make you understand the fragility of the vegetation in this area. If you put cattle in this kind of landscape, within a very short time, this area will become a desert. And we will have developed something like this, where animals will have to walk long distances to access the nearest grazing resources. Cattle from Hukunzi drive 10 kilometers daily to access water back to the grazing area, something that is not sustainable. These areas definitely are not meant for livestock, particularly looking at the feeding behaviors of these animals. Wildlife, their densities and their adaptive strategies allow them to survive with this very little resources in the area. So it is important that we try with all we have to try and keep them as wild as possible. Much as the anthropogenic effects can have, sometimes we have droughts. The picture on the left of your screen, as you can see, this eland is still intact. This is probably because it died of a disease or died of a drought, as compared to one on the right. I'm sure Glenn is smiling seeing his picture with the red beast. The one on the right definitely shows you that this animal was either killed by predators and fed on by scavengers or the predator. So there are many factors that will naturally affect the population. And then the other thing that I also want to continue emphasizing is the passion of this tracker. This is actually one of the master trackers who was assessed by a gentleman called Louis Lubenbeck. Unfortunately, he's late, but he left a lot of skills impacted on young boys that we had to train to be trackers as a way of trying to revive these skills, to maintain it, with the hope that eventually to be used as part of conservation and tourism in the area. This gentleman, this is another master tracker from Bere area, which is slightly north of where we are talking about. Again, demonstrating the skills, the knowledge of their resources, how survival skills in the area, what fruits and vegetables one can eat in the wild for specific needs. It could be medicinal, it could be just to maintain moisture, it could be just to get some proteins. And these are some of the things that I believe most tourists will be happy to experience, getting it from these guys who have lived and learned how to survive in this. This is one of the training that I've just mentioned, where we gathered some of the guys that showed some basic skills of trekking to try and use them as part of research and conservation initiatives. This is Louis Lubenbeck, who came to train these guys to be able to use a cyber tracker, which is like a software on a handheld device, to try and you could use this to be able to do on spore surveys. You could use it for any observation. It could be birds, it could be animal behavior. So once you have impacted these skills, like combining technology with this indigenous knowledge, we can go far. Derek Kipping is using these trackers to do the spore surveys, which he has also demonstrated that you can actually do animal counts as accurate as the area surveys, but with very, very low cost compared to when you are getting aircraft to do the area surveys. And again, I'm saying this because I want to emphasize the effect or the amount of knowledge that we will lose and eventually cost us money that could otherwise be used on other aspects of conservation. A lot of information, a lot of advice have been made in the past. We have been reminded in 2010, 10 years from back, that protection and restoration of this Swele area, which is primarily the wildlife management areas, is important and needs to be done as quickly as possible. And the question that comes to one's mind is, how do we protect this area if we need to protect it? And I have two options, basically. The option one, I believe we can go back to the fortress conservation approach, the fence and fine approach, which we can take the Swele part of the KTP and relocate people from these areas. This option cannot be a good option in the current situation. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, remember the CKGR relocation case. I don't want to believe our government will want to go into that again. Even today, the battle is still not over. So this approach, much as it may over time preserve this Australia area, it's not the best option, or it's not a better option for now. Another option would be using the communities, working with them, making them part of the solution, engaging them in the planning process, making them understand why we want to conserve, and making them part of the process. I've talked about the tourism potential of the culture. I've talked about the research and the conservation potentials of the skills that these people have. When they see benefits of living with these resources, they will have a good reason to preserve them. This is not new. The reason why CBNRM, which is community-based natural resource management, was initiated, pioneered as the campfire in Zimbabwe, was primarily to acknowledge that this fence and fine approach can no longer work, particularly if we cannot do anything about the increasing human population and the associated effects on natural resources. So my belief is that this option is the only option that we have now if we were to preserve the Australia area. And what I've just said, I just want to highlight a few things. This has been said for many years. Old and wise researchers and conservationists in the past have said this and have told the decision makers about what needs to be done. Alec Campbell, in 1973, when I was born, and I consider myself an old man, already enlightened us, or those who were there then, that increase in agriculture will complicate protected area management. Primarily because as human population increases, they will be moving closer to these areas, and there will be competition for grazing resources. There will be illegal offtake. There will be other aspects that are associated with this increase in agricultural activities. And a multidisciplinary approach is, or was and is, and will continue to be a way forward for these areas. 1983, another strong statement, which highlights again that it is important to address external threats to protected areas. And in this particular case, it's even said because this area is not even protected. But integrating environmental approach, which enhance security of protected areas, we need to implement multidisciplinary approach. Again, 1992, when I finished my high school, Wells and Brandon also said the same thing. You need to acknowledge the social and economic needs of the people that are living around these areas. We need to make them benefit and also be active players in our conservation efforts. A former assistant director in the Department of Wildlife and National Parks in 1998 made a statement in an article that CBNRM for the Department of Wildlife need to focus in Kalahari. He was the director for the department, and he said the department need to focus in Kalahari, primarily with acknowledgement of the fact that the human population is slowly encroaching into what we consider to be prime areas for wildlife. This has been said, everybody has heard, but what we do about it is another story. I don't want to spend time on this slide, but basically this highlights that, understanding the culture and acknowledging it and appreciating that the culture of people living in those particular areas need to be considered, need to be accommodated, and need to be enhanced in such a way that they feel that they are not undermined by the authorities. And CBNRM in south of Botswana has seen some changes. I happen to be part of the team that initiated the CBNRM program in 1999. And I don't want to waste your time talking about the specific models of what community-based natural resource management means. But what we have been practicing in Botswana primarily was a community-based quota utilization, because the community was given a quota, particularly for hunting. It was a good start, because it gave the communities a hope. But we should have taken this to another level. But instead, we went a step back. I'm sure some of you remember or know the hunting ban that came in around 2014. It didn't come suddenly. After 2007, the hunting quota was reduced significantly. You know, what this do, because you give the communities some hope and they join you with the belief that indeed will benefit. As you can see in this graph, the income was increasing from 2004 to 2007. And thereafter it reduced when you reduce the quota. This happens without any discussion, without any initiation of how then do we help these communities to maintain the expectation, which was legitimate, and so that they can continue to be part of what we want to believe is a solution for conservation. And what this does, it affects their perception. And as the income drops, obviously their participation in conservation also drops. And that takes us to square one. As this happens, this is part of the study that was done recently, human rate of conflict increases, as you can see. In Kalahari, it has been increasing over the years from 2014 to date. As you can see, the different species that are affected are involved. The wild dog population is seriously affected, lion population. What this do to the system is worrisome. What is more, Kalahari is supposed to be the less populated area in terms of wildlife densities. But when you look at the mortalities or the predator mortalities that are associated with human rate of conflict, the first graph on your left is Kalahari. It shows, I mean, one would expect to see more conflict in high density areas like in northern Botswana. But unfortunately, we are losing more predators in the southwest Botswana, which is supposed to be a low density area. We already have few carnivores and we have high mortalities, primarily because livestock and wildlife are interacting and causing this conflict. And if the CBNRM, which I believe is the solution, is not the answer, we will have a problem. We certainly have to accept, forget about the future of the Shwele. And when you forget about the future of the Shwele, we should forget about the integrity of the Kalahari ecosystem, because it depends on the Shwele, which is these wildlife management areas. And what that will mean then is to try and make our protected areas, being the Kalahari Transfrontier Park and the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, functional. And that will cost us a lot of money, because we have to provide the resources that are not there, which are in the Shwele area, which is the wildlife management areas. And we have to hope, unfortunately, with the very little expectation, because when the Shwele is gone, I don't see us having significant populations of wildlife in the next 30 years. So our next generation will only hear stories about the Shwele. In conclusion, we have been told by those that have been doing this before, and surely we have heard, and enough knowledge has been given, but there's the trends on what we are doing now. I initially talked about how wrong our boundaries of our protected areas are. Secondly, our introduction of CBNRM, which was supposed to be to complement or to limit or reduce the impact of increasing human population, is failing. We need to revive the CBNRM program, because to me, that is the only way forward. We need to work with these communities and hope that going forward, we can still have these resources and for our future generations. I must end with this slide from the gentleman. May his soul rest in peace. A very wise man indeed. His words are very simple. The long-term conservation of wildlife will not be achieved by military tactics, on computer screens, or at workshops, but field conservationists will build relationships with the people living with wildlife or around our national parks. I don't think there's any better message than this one. And if we can fail to acknowledge this, which was accumulated, this gentleman has learned it for over these years on his life. And this is the message he leaves with us that I want to end my presentation with. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your concentration. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Moses. Thanks. I'm glad you were able to come back to us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was worried, but I'm glad we managed to fix it. Yeah.
Good, good. I actually had two questions for you, if that's okay. The first one, I missed something that you said as a part of your presentation, and it was specifically about communities, which is my focus in conservation. It was when you were on a slide of the revenue trends table. I think something changed. I feel like maybe you were saying the hunting quota changed. Did they allow hunting and then they didn't allow hunting, and so then their income went down? I missed what you were saying about
what actually happened. They initially, because what they normally do, they will release a quota on an annual basis. Say maybe 20 Remsburg, 50 elands, whatever. But what happened then, they reduced the amount of animals in the quota over time.
Okay.
Before there was a total ban on hunting.
Okay.
So the reduction in the revenue was a result of the reduction in the quota, and then eventually the hunting ban, which meant no income at all.
Okay, excellent, thank you. I assume that's what you meant, but I just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
So my other question was then, a large part of what I heard you talk about with working with the communities is the possibility for tourism. My first introduction to sub-Saharan Africa was on one of those big overland trucks, you know, the camping trucks. So I did a month camping safari from Kenya to South Africa. And so we passed the Kalahari, and we did visit with communities. That was a large part of what we were doing there in the Kalahari. So I very much enjoyed it. It was a highlight of my 2-month trip going through 11 countries. The question I actually had at the time, and I'll ask it of you, I hope you are knowledgeable about this. How many communities are actually interacting with tourism and groups and overlanders? How many are actually benefiting from that contact? Is it a few communities and they get all the tourism trucks that come through, or do they spread it out so more communities can benefit?
I think it would be in different scenarios. Basically, I would say in communities that are within these concession areas, primarily the wildlife management areas, when there's an active safari operation, it could be hunting or photographic safari. Usually they have these community trusts which are acting on behalf of the community. So it will be a selected group of people. But then the level of involvement of the community would depend on the magnitude of the activity. If, for example, it's a hunting operation which involves skinning and all those guiding, all that, then there will be more people, community from the villages being involved. But if it's just maybe people self-drives, photographic safari, obviously they will not engage a lot of communities. So it's at different levels. But basically, what I can say is that majority of the communities in those areas are not directly interacting with the operations.
Okay.
Which is something that needs to be improved, because the more these effects are felt at different household levels, the more it will be more impactful in terms of getting them to be part of the conservation initiatives.
Right. So who would you go to? Is that the Ministry of Tourism to try and get more communities involved? Who would you approach to try and pursue that and encourage that?
The approach that the government is doing, like there will be specific concession areas that will be allocated to specific communities depending on the proximity of the communities to those areas. And then they will be given the area as their concession area. Now, this is where you need other stakeholders, because government will allow that to happen, but sometimes government has, of course, have got some limitations as well. So you need other stakeholders to come on board in terms of training the communities, coming up with collaborative participatory approach in terms of coming up with the initiative that can help the community in the area if it comes to issues like development of campsites, training of customer care and all that, because some of these things they don't have. But if you build that, you are eventually building a community that will be independent going forward, that they will be able to manage tourism on their own. But they need to be held by the hand and then trained, mentored, and facilitated to eventually do it right.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amy. Just want to mention, next person is Clarissa Hughes. Before we unmute you, you are already unmuted, Clarissa. Just want to say, Gus, I think you had a question about the oryx after Clarissa, and I think Glenn Maud also wanted to refer to the fencing side. But over to you now, Clarissa, and then Gus and Glenn. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Moses, firstly, thank you for a great presentation. It was wonderful.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I come from a tourism background, and I'm currently working with Beatree on technology that will do exactly what you are proposing, bringing rural communities into the tourism space by protecting wildlife and cultural attributes. Rod might have seen my presentation at the Conservation Lab, when was it, last year? But I would really, really like to talk with you and get your feedback on what we've done so far. The guys at Beatree should be finishing at the end of October. COVID has slowed things down. But if you could give me your email, and then possibly we could take our conversation onto another platform where I would really appreciate your feedback.
Sure. Yeah. No, that would be great. Basically, I'm impressed that you said you're working with Beatree on that because there are a lot of stakeholders that are also very much interested in trying to help the communities. A friend of mine who is also part of this participants here, Scott Parker, they're also trying to help the communities in those areas to try and bring as much tourism into the area, because we believe that is the only way we can help this community. So we getting more people that have the same interest, obviously with different backgrounds and different skills. I'm sure we can gather something that will be very helpful eventually to our communities and primarily or eventually to our conservation efforts as conservationists.
So Moses, would you mind giving me your email address?
Clarissa,
Yes,
if I can come in, we can exchange, we can send you Moses' contact details.
Yeah,
I will connect you guys.
Yeah. If you could, Clarissa, I think basically, can you give us a 30-second synopsis of what it is about for the rest of the people listening?
Okay, it's basically a mobile app and dashboard that rewards people, Botswana or local people, and it can be expanded to any country, but we are starting it in Botswana because it's a government initiative through the Botswana Institute of Technology Research and Innovation. It rewards people who live with wildlife through mobile money. It encourages tourists to go to remote areas where communities are looking after wildlife. And there's a whole bunch. You gave me 30 seconds. It appeals to purpose travel. There's tons. It decongests high traffic areas and. So it's very exciting. Beatree are developing it. And we've got very, very positive feedback from everybody we've talked to so far.
Okay, fantastic. That was enough of a synopsis. And yeah, we will definitely, I think Chris and I will talk to you soon about, Michaela Menanon is doing the same thing in East Africa. So we need to synergize you guys, get them together. And with Moses and everybody, it would be great.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. I think Gus was next on with a question. Gus, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Moses, for a very informative and interesting overview of the issues and the conditions in that part of the world. As you know, I'm also very, very interested in the Kalahari. One thing that I'd like to ask you, perhaps try and enlarge a bit on, and it's something that I've never really quite understood about the Shweli. What is it? Do you know what exactly what the characteristics are that seem to make it such an important area for wildlife?
Yeah, thanks, Gus. Basically, this area, the main feature in this area will be those salt pens. I believe they are the primary source to this whole system. I think I mentioned it earlier that one, if you go to these areas around October, November, in the dry season towards the bathing period, you'll see most of this wildlife actually licking salts around these salt pens. So it's very important, particularly for pregnant animals towards the calving period. Again, the grass that grow around these pens, particularly on the edges, because when water is in the pens, these salts will be going to the edge of the pens, and the forage quality is very high, which also helps particularly during the wet season. The other thing is the openness of the area, and the other aspect is also, I think it's also critical, which people tend to forget. When during the calving period, it looks like most of the animals will be in this area. There is less density of carnivores compared to when you go to the Nosop Valley or you go to the CKGR or those areas. So it's very ideal, particularly in the wet season, for the animals to go there, forage, salt licks, security of the calves. And again, just the openness of the area, I think it also gives them that security for against predation. And again, if you look at the history of the distribution of wildlife in the area, it's apparent that then most of the wildlife were actually seen in those areas. And they would particularly go to the Nosop Valley for water, or they would go through the CKGR to the other northeastern part of the area, particularly to get water. In this particular area, the Shwele area, there is no surface water. They survive on water-bearing plants like the summer melons, sometimes very short-lived water pools in the wet season. So just the survival skills, the adaptive strategies in those areas, and how they provide the right nutrients at the right time for the calving period.
But Moses, I'm you know, there are lots of areas in the KTP and where you get huge concentrations of pans as well. Is that, because you didn't actually include that in the Shwela. So, you know, Rambucus pans, all those pans in the northern part or the western part of the KTP, aren't they a very similar habitat to the Shwela?
That's a very good question, guys, because I had at one point wanted to physically sample grasses in the Kuche system, the KTP, Maguasube particularly, and compare with the Shwele. The reason being that the Maguasube system and the Kuche system, they've got artificial water holes, but wildlife don't stay there. They were only there for a short period of time. They would rather spend most of the time in the Shwele area. Like your curiosity is suggesting, there must be something particularly special that keeps these animals there, which still need to be validated, and so that you can confidently say this thing is the one that actually makes these animals stay here. When you look at the legal offtake of Springbok that I talked about, but they still hang around those villages. They know they will be poached because when they see vehicles, they see people, they run away, but they'll still come back. The question is why? What is there particularly? I saw some presentation a few weeks ago about some plant that I believe to be highly nutritious. I think it's one of the things that one needs to go into to see. It's a small shrub, which I think we need to look into those and see what exactly is it about those plants. Is it about the salt licks? What exactly is it about? Because what I've just mentioned is something that has been believed for quite some time.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're right. I think there's quite a lot of research that needs to be done to really also to understand these different areas and what they are, what they contain and what they don't contain, and compare them.
Yeah.
Then one
Okay.
other.
Are you?
Yeah.
Go on, Gus. Sorry.
Sorry, just the other question that I also pointed out when you were not with us is it did seem interesting that the eland population has increased. The numbers of eland seem to have gone up quite a lot in that graph you showed. Did you comment on that?
Yeah, it's, well, to be honest, Gus, I'm not sure what happened, but there is this very interesting change of now having more elands in the area. We don't know where they come. The same thing happens with the wild dogs. We don't have answers. We don't really know. It's some of those areas that still needs to be investigated further to understand what is going on. Suddenly, we seem to be having more wild dogs than people believed. We don't know whether it's because it's how the intensity of trying to find their presence, or they have actually genuinely increased, or they've moved in from somewhere. These are some of the questions that for now, I honestly don't have the answers to, but they are worth investigating. Yeah.
Thank you, Moses. Rod, I think
we have, yeah, we have Glyn Maud wants to ask a question. I mean, he was.
And then after Glyn, I would like to ask Sabine Rietmiller just to give us a quick explanation on the Swale. Please, Sabine. First Glyn and then Sabine.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I mean, the question actually wasn't mine. It was asked when Moses wasn't online. Someone wanted to know about the fences around the KTP in the southwest. And to be fair, I think Moses can just answer that question, Moses. You know, I gave an answer in your absence, but what are the fences like in the areas in KD1, KD2, and the KTP? That was a question, so I think it's appropriate for Moses to answer it.
Okay. Yeah, basically, there is one fence in the southern boundary of the KTP, which runs from the two Riverian Gate for 100 kilometers towards Maguasube. That fence is primarily, it was actually initiated by trying to address the human line of conflict with the farmers in that area. It's supposed to be an electric fence for a predator-proof fence, primarily to address human line of conflict. Other fences, otherwise the rest of the KTP is not fenced on the Botswana side. The only other fences would be in ranches that are further east around the Hukunti area, which is in a communal area. But in this WMAs, there is no fence at all. It's just open system.
Thank you. Sabine Rietmiller, if you can come in, we just unmute you.
Yes,
and please show your face, Sabine. She's the lady from Chumbe Island in Zanzibar.
Yes.
Very well known for that incredible marine park she's established. Sabine?
Yes, thank you, Chris. And Moses, I was so impressed. Fantastic presentation. And though the conclusions are very sad. Now, I was intrigued by you mentioning that a gentleman called the area Schwelle. I assume this was a German man and he was maybe a biologist, because Schwelle is a German word which means something like doorstep between inside and outside areas, but it can also be a broader meaning, like at the doorstep to a new phase in your life or to a new age. It's quite a broad term. You can also use like more symbolically. And now I just Googled the Botswana Schwelle term and found that it does indeed apparently divide two different areas. It says in Sanpak's page that the Schwelle, which is the doorstep, separates the Okwa and Hanahai river system in the north and the Noso. I mean, I think this is probably very well known to you, and this might be the reason that the man who put the term on that side felt like this was an area separating two different areas. That's just my take to it. If that helps.
Yes, yeah. I think the meaning of Schwelle, all the meanings that you described, would pretty much suit that area. And yeah, I can confirm. I believe the guy was a German. I think his name was Passage. One of the valleys in the CKJ was also named after him. He passed through the area around 1901. So I want to believe he was amused by the spectacular pens and how they join these two systems, the Ogwa and the Ob River systems.